Recording in progress.
Good afternoon and welcome to this special board meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Sequoia Union High School District, Wednesday, February 8th, 2023, 3:30 p.m. start time. The first item on our agenda is a closed session meeting. Any members of the public wishing to comment in advance on the topic of our closed session meeting? Now would be the opportunity to make a comment on that closed session meeting. If there is anyone, I will go through the protocols for making a comment. There's no one in the live audience to make a comment. Is there any attendee wishing to comment? If so, please click the raise hand button. Okay. Seeing no public comment, we will adjourn to closed session.
Progress.
Okay, the board has returned from closed session, and I have nothing to report from the closed session discussion. The next item is explanation to audience of the public protocols. There's opportunity for the members of the public that are live and members of the public that are participating by Zoom to participate and comment on items on the agenda. With the two topics we have today, both of them are being led by facilitators. We're going to have the facilitators speak, and then we'll have board clarifying questions and comments, and then we'll hear from the public after that on each of those agenda items. When that time comes, I'll go over the exact protocols for participating. At this point, we'll do roll call.
Trustee Nori,
Here.
Trustee Coe,
Here.
Trustee Dubois,
Here.
Vice President Stevenson,
Here.
President Ginn.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Great. Next item is approval of today's agenda. Does anybody have any comments about the agenda? Motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of approving the agenda? Aye.
Aye.
Unanimously passes. Next is the discussion item, starting with anti-bias training. Crystal, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Good afternoon. I probably should have asked how you pronounce your last name, Dr. Dan. Can I call you Dr. Dan? Dr. Dan, okay? Okay. Okay. Dr. Dan has joined us by way of Nicole Anderson Consulting, who has worked with the district before a couple of years ago regarding some equity work, and she was unavailable tonight, so she sent her right hand to guide us through and facilitate what I anticipate to be a wonderful and full of knowledge anti-bias training for our governance team. So Dan, Dr. Dan, welcome.
We're going to get a cordless mic. We're going to get a cordless mic for you.
Well, you may have seen some of the research that shows within the first 15 seconds, people tend to decide if or if not, you will learn from me. It doesn't, I guess I have to do real close. Okay. Whether or not you will or will not learn from me. And that's typically true in the classroom. And it's true with the community you serve. So I've got a question for you now. You just had a few moments to check me out, so to speak. And what I'd like you to do is just, if you would turn to somebody close by, and based on the assessment, I'm not getting the advancement on my slides. There it goes. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. And chat with somebody close by. What do you think I like to do for fun? What type of music do you think I like? What type of food does he like? And based on my size, saying all food is not fair. And what do you think is my nationality? Chat with somebody close by to make a little bit of assessment on me. And I invite the audience people to do the same. Chit chat. Okay, let me interrupt you here. We're on a tight schedule here. So what are some things you think I might like to do for fun? Oh, be brave. I
Also have absolutely no idea.
had no idea. Okay.
You like to
Social events,
hanging out with friends.
hanging out with friends. Like to walk my dog.
Just a reminder to please talk into your microphones.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting because I am now the proud grandfather of 3 grandchildren. And a couple of years ago, when I would do this, I would say playing Legos. Well, they're now, my 2 boys are now 11 and 8, heavy into basketball. So I spend a lot of time watching basketball games, watching them play basketball games. And my little 5-year-old granddaughter is a dancer. So I'm back. And what's interesting is this is what was true when my kids were growing up. What type of music do you think I like?
Sinatra.
Sinatra.
Feels
So-
a little weird answering that question, just in case I make a mistake.
And that's okay. That's okay. That's part of the point. That's part of the point. Well, you put on some good Beatles music and I tend to just kind of mellow out a little bit. So,
You don't like hip hop?
oh, I'll do hip hop. I can be eclectic with my music. Beatles just tend to be on top. So what type of food do you think I like?
Italian. I'm so brave. I answer every question.
Food.
Home cooked food. Okay, well, I'll step in here and I'm not going to give you the complete answer on this one because it ties in with this next question as well. So there are a variety of foods I like, and there's one in particular, but I'll come back to it. What do you think is my nationality?
Latino?
I'm sorry,
Latino?
Latino?
Yeah, I'll look at your name.
You look at my name.
Possibly-
Actually, somebody figured it
possibly
out for my
mixed
name
race,
already.
Possibly mixed race?
Possibly mixed race? Well, the truth be told, my father immigrated from Portugal, and that's where Moreo comes from. And as I was sharing earlier, in Portugal, it actually should be pronounced Marao. My grandparents Americanized it, and it's Moreo here. My mother immigrated from Nicaragua. Now, when my mother and her family immigrated over here, my abuelita worked as a cook in a Mexican restaurant. And when abuelita would cook, it was quite a meal. And that's the food that I have adopted as part of me there. Matter of fact, my abuelita used to make her own chorizo. And I am looking for that recipe because I have yet to find chorizo that matches it. So why did I have you go through this sort of activity to start off? Part of what I was looking for is notice, and even though didn't get a lot of responses right away we tend to assess other people, form some opinions. Think about it. Have you ever made sure that you kind of walked around somebody because it was a little scary getting too close to them? Have you ever had a situation whereas you met somebody new and you really got into the conversation and suddenly a new friendship was happened? And have you ever had the opportunity where you've met somebody new and after a few moments you go, thank you, it's real nice, thank you. We all tend to have tend to form an opinion and idea about people, which leads to the whole notion of bias. What are we talking about with bias? And Curtis Linton, who's done a lot of work on with equity, this is something he says, until we understand our own realities, and this is something we don't spend enough time on, looking at ourselves closely and what is it from my life experiences, from what's going on here, what is it that I bring to this situation? I teach a course for folks getting their administrative credential. And one of the readings that we have is, what is the value different cultures bring? And we look at the different aspects. And for the students, it's really an eye opener. It's like, I hadn't thought about that before. What is the value, or what do I bring to the table from my cultural background, my life experiences? And so getting to know these things allows us to adhere, allows us to identify our biases and where we're going. In the short time we got together, I'm going to try to get through 3 outcomes here. What does bias look like? We're going to look at the cultural proficiency continuum, and we're going to start to identify barriers to educational and racial equity. And I particularly enjoyed your second goal here. I'm still looking for the first one, but the second goal here, there you go. But we're going to look at what are some of the barriers there. So as we talk, what I really hope is that you feel comfortable speaking your truth. We get outside of our comfort zone, and that's when the real learning starts to happen. Some of us may become a little more vulnerable than others, but we're going to respect each other for what we stand for. Hopefully you'll stay engaged and keep an open mind to learning. So I'd like you to read this. This is a problem. As a matter of fact, I'd like you to solve it. Anybody come up with an answer yet?
I think the answer's in the last sentence, but
Yeah, okay. Well, here's another version of it. It's an analogy lesson, but notice what happened. And the answer to this right now isn't important. But how many of our students come into our classroom and what they hear sounds like whatever, and this happens to be Italian, what they hear that and they don't know what's going on. They have a hard time connecting. And so that's part of why we need to look at our biases. What are we doing on a regular basis? How often does a student of a culture different than our own see themselves in the learning process? Where do they see examples of themselves? So what I want to share with you is what we call the equity continuum. And this comes from the work of Randall and Dolores Lindsay out of Southern California, the Cal State LA. The first one is cultural destructiveness, cultural incapacity, cultural blindness, cultural precompetence, cultural competence, and then finally cultural proficiency. And in the packet of information that you have a further explanation of these. But let me walk us through them real quick. The first one is cultural destructiveness. We see the difference and we try to stomp it out. Get rid of it. It doesn't exist. In our nation's history, we've seen some real dramatic situations of this. Slavery, the internment of the Japanese during World War II. Those are 2 significant events where that was cultural destructiveness. There must be a problem, get rid of them or enslave them. The next one is cultural incapacity. We see the difference and we make it wrong. Think of the student who speaks another language and somebody says to them, we're in America now, speak English. That's cultural incapacity. We see that they're talking differently, and we try to make it wrong. Now we move along, cultural blindness. This is where somebody might say, I don't see color. As soon as we say that, we have dismissed a significant part of who that individual is. Somebody might want to react and say, you darn well better see my color, because that makes up a significant part of who I am. Now, moving along the continuum, we get to cultural precompetence. We see the difference, but we respond inadequately. We hear something, somebody says something, it might be a microaggression of some sort or another, and we may laugh at it. Or we may say, that offends me, stop. And that cuts off a conversation right there. So what we want to do is move a little further to get to cultural competence, where we see the difference, we understand our differences, and we understand and starting to appreciate the differences, the value the differences bring. And ultimately what we're trying to get to is cultural proficiency. And this is where we see the differences and we learn to respond appropriately so that we can keep moving forward. So cultural proficiency is where we're headed. What I need to tell you is this is probably should be more in a circular model, because trust me, and I've been doing this work for a number of years now, and I can't tell you how many times, even to this day, I try to think I'm very proficient. I suddenly step into it. I've said something wrong. I've reacted unbeknownst to me. I was working with a school in another district, and we were doing an equity walk. We went into this one classroom. The principal was a Black African-American woman. This classroom we walked into was a lady, a white Anglo lady, and she had her room decorated in monkeys. We walked out of the room, and the principal shared with us, you don't know how offensive this room is to me. And so we had a conversation. So what are we going to do about it? What's happening? And she explained why it was offensive to her. And what we did. And so she ended up having a conversation with the teacher, and they came to some agreement on how and why. In all honesty, that teacher was in all innocence. She likes monkeys, and she had them in, and she's working with a predominantly Black community. So for certain cultures, this is not acceptable. So and that's us constantly paying attention to what's going on around us. So what I'd like to do, let's see if this starts up on its own. It doesn't look like it's going to. I want to show you a quick video here. There it goes. Thank you. Now, typically we use this video when we're discussing the topic of privilege. And that's, hopefully you saw a lot of that in there. And what's interesting is I sometimes get challenged well, I often get challenged, but with this video, it's like, that doesn't happen today. I'm sorry, folks, it does. An example I have is, and again, in another school district I was working in, the assistant superintendent was a Black African-American woman, and she always dressed to the T. And she was out shopping with her daughter. And they were walking around the store, and her daughter stopped her and says, "Mom, that man's following us." And she said, "Nah." So she took a few more trips around the store, and sure enough, and finally she stopped and said, "Are you following me?" And the response was, "Oh, maybe you needed help." Well, the reality and the way it got interpreted by this individual was no, because of the color of my skin. And that's the piece we need to think about. How's the receiver getting the message? It's not so much what we're doing, and we may have the right intentions, but what we really need to look at is the person receiving the message. How are they taking it? And that's where we go over and over. At the start of COVID, I was a superintendent there in this one particular district. And in this community, the demographics had changed significantly, and it had become a very strong Asian and Indian population. And one of the board members one night, and it's what you might call a safe community, all those things, all the pieces about the community would say it's in a positive direction. One night at a board meeting, during the board member report, our one Asian board member did a passionate presentation about how she's never felt so unsafe in her community. Because, as you may know, when COVID first started, Asian people were being accused of the cause of it. And her comments, and I have it recorded, the sad part of that is the very next day she got killed. I've gotten permission from her husband to show the clip from our board meeting, because it's such a passionate, and she speaks to it so clearly. But that's another situation where suddenly we have a crisis in this country, and we want to blame a particular group of people for it. It's somewhat human nature. Think about it. When something goes wrong, who did this? Who's at fault? We want to pin the blame on somebody. That's somewhat human nature. But if we're going to truly be a society accepting of each other and appreciating our cultural differences, we need to better understand and look at our own biases. What are the biases we bring? And what are the biases that I'm carrying out in whatever role I play? My mother, as I already said, came from Nicaragua. When she came to this country, she told us, her children, stories about how she would get beat up at school, and even the teachers would insult her because she couldn't speak English. As a result, she did not want any of her 4 children to speak Spanish. One of my life disappointments is I am not fluent with Spanish. Matter of fact, I took French in school. Oui. That's about as far as it went, And to this day, and I've had to learn more Spanish because every community I served seemed to be in a predominantly Spanish-speaking community. And in order for me to be able to relate to the community, the students, and the broader community, I needed to pick up some of the language. Again, my mom's bias weren't going to teach her kids this. So here's what I want to do is ask you, and you could think about this, or you could talk, and again, you could talk with each other. If 3 of you talk, we're not violating the Brown Act because you're doing it right here in public. And you're going to share out here. We're not making decisions. What educational and racial equity gaps exist in your district? Think about achievement. think about discipline, think about attendance, think about staffing and engagement. Moment, chat with somebody, or if you need to, jot something down. Just take a moment or two. So let me interrupt you. And I'm wondering if anybody would like to speak to this at this point, as you think about your district, your students. Is there any educational, racial, equity gaps that exist here? Yes.
We talked a little bit, just a little bit about achievement and discipline. And then I wanted to say staffing and what positions people hold.
Yeah, interesting. One of the activities I have my students do is they assess the student demographics at their school. Then they assess the staff demographics and they say, where's the match and where's the mismatch? And who's there? Yes.
Our continuation school, if you look at the demographics there,
Mhm.
mostly
Yes.
low income, Redwood. And then also attendance, if you look at who's chronically absent.
Absent, exactly, exactly. And do we always know the why of this? That's the next step. We can identify, matter of fact, when you look at data, and particularly behavioral data, what data seems to always jump up when you're looking at behavior?
I think one of the things that I'm learning is that through some own work that I'm doing is when I give the stats back to the people who it's about, they have a different story as to what that stat is. And sometimes they'll say, that's not true.
Yeah.
So it's, depending on how that data is being used, it can be used as information to colorize it and to give it life as to what it really means, but it has to come from the people whom it's about.
That's about. There you go. Good. Thank you. Excellent point. Thank you. I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. And where I was going was if you typically, when we talk about behavioral data, it's typically is we see our Black males dominating that statistic. And I always ask when I'm working with a district, so how far have you gone? How deep have you gone in your idea about, let's ask them, or let's talk to somebody. Is it all Black males creating this problem? Or is it some repeat offenders that we need to do something to help change how they're approaching it? And so many times they haven't had enough models in their life, role models that they see. And, one of the things that pains me, oftentimes when I do this activity, and this comes more from, I've had it more from Black women in particular, who share with the group that when my sons started to go out on their own in terms of, teenagers and things like that, we have to have the talk. If you're stopped by a police officer, make sure your hands are visible. Do not give them any lip. And they go on and tell the whole scenario. And what's interesting to me with different groups, I hear the same story, which tells me this is a real issue. And so what I typically will do and say, okay, folks, how many of you have had to give that talk? Yes.
There's something that you said, but that I want to challenge a little bit. You
Please
said
do.
you.
Yeah, no, I said, please
Okay.
do.
Oh, okay. Please do. Sorry, I didn't hear that part. You said, when talking about the Black male child, that sometimes we need to help them. And sometimes I'm misphrasing you. We can look back at the recording. But there are times when I feel as a parent of a Black male child who didn't do school the same way as everyone else,
Mhm.
that I wonder what would happen if the system said, there's nothing wrong with you,
Mhm.
let me adjust. So in early care, we say the parent or the adult does the shifting, not the child, right? Because we're trying to shift so that they can learn certain skills until they're able to understand what those are. But because they have their own beat, we have to kind of meet them where they are. And it's natural because they're kids and their mind is still developing. And their bodies are still developing. So when I hear that, I think a more of a strength basis that they're who they're supposed to be. Let the system shift.
And thank you for doing that. And I do appreciate anybody challenge anything I say. And with that, I actually think we're on the same page in some ways. When I said, let's talk to them, we need to understand their stories. How many of our students do we truly understand the story? We're quick to impose discipline issues, things like that. But do we really know what's behind? What's the story behind that particular child? And so when I talk about the data of Black males, it's like, let's see who's in this, coming up in this data. And what is it that me as an educator, you as a board, what is it that we need to put in place to better honor that student and where they're coming from? And we start to see some generalizations going back and forth. So thank you, Board Member Stevenson. Again, I appreciate challenges, and doing this work, I get challenged a lot. Actually, as a superintendent, I get challenged a lot. Yes, Amy.
One
Ms. Cole,
one
I'm
thing
sorry.
I'd like to add too is the level of engagement from. It's supposed to be on. Maybe it's too far. Yeah, so one thing I was wondering was a difference in parent engagement as well. And in terms of feedback that's coming back to the board or coming back to administrators, I think there's a difference amongst communities.
And I would concur with that. And it becomes incumbent upon us as the educators, as the leaders, as the people in the schools to better understand where are they coming from. Again, I go back, do we know their story? Do we understand where they're coming from? And we do a significant piece on this when we're doing the full training. Any other comments, challenges? So again, for you as board members, these are the sort of things you want to think about and have in your mind as you go through and do your governance and you develop your policies. So, our schools, people often will say are broken. Well, they're really not. What they are achieving is for those who they were established. And if you look at that box on the bottom left, and see how the first public schools were in fact put in place and what their purpose was, we really haven't deviated from that a whole lot. And so as our society started to change in terms of demographics and things like that, where have we kept up? And then I always like that one, the definition of insanity. In this profession, I will give almost everybody a pat on the back because they work very hard and put in long hours. But have we adjusted to who we're serving? How well do we know who we're serving? And that's the question we want to ask. So what is some of the barriers? What are some of the barriers to racial equity? Well, there's the presumption of entitlement. I live in a neighborhood that drives me crazy in that there are a number of blocks and things like that, and there's stop signs everywhere. I'm concerned that my neighbors don't know how to read. Because I swear they just drive on through. And at one time I tend to try to bicycle, and I called out as somebody was just coming right through and I was on my bicycle going past. I called out and the fellow stopped and he said, "What's your problem?" I said, See that sign? It means stop. And he says, this neighborhood isn't that crowded. So he had a sense of entitlement. He didn't have to stop. It's like, hold on, are you waiting until something serious happens? And that's a very surface level sort of example, but that's, many of us feel a sense of entitlement based on who we are and where we come from. Within the system, there are systems of oppression. Sadly, my very first superintendency, I was walking through a school with the principal, again, another Black female. And we walked into this one classroom, and the teacher had a group of students in front of her. And at their desk with their heads down were 4 Black children. I walked in and I immediately said to the principal, either you handle this right now or I'm going to handle it. And she said, no, let me handle it. I stepped out of the room. She had the conversation with the teacher. I later got a grievance filed on me because I was influencing this and trying to dictate to this person what they were doing. The grievance went nowhere. But again, it's that whole notion, there's something wrong with those kids. And when you look at them and they're the same group of kids in terms of ethnicity and color, you wonder, wait a minute, you mean none of the white kids have given you a problem? Then there's the unawareness of the need to adapt. I've mentioned this a little earlier in terms of as our demographics changed, how have we changed to make sure they're getting the same level rigor of education that everybody's getting? Microaggressions. So often we may make a statement, you know, you're really pretty smart, a math teacher might say, and I don't mean to pick on teachers, but I'll use this example. A math teacher might say, you're pretty smart for a girl. Excuse me, the gender doesn't matter. The gender should not matter, but that's a type of microaggressions. And again, we go into this pretty deeply in our work. The typical stereotypes and how we form those, and then the whole notion of implicit bias. So those are some of the barriers that get in our way of truly being equitable and inclusive. And hopefully that's where we want to go to. Now, in that packet of information, you've got a couple of articles, and I am going to leave you with a little bit of a homework there. You've got one on the water systems of change, and this piece comes from that particular article. These are the 6 conditions of change. And for you as a board, that upper part of that triangle is where you and your staff interact. What are the policies that are in place? And I don't know your policy about who gets into AP classes and who doesn't. Is there some sort of policy that may be excluding some students? You know, I just recently had a significant class reunion, and me and this young lady that I used to date, we were chatting, and she said, do you remember how all the GATE kids and all those kids in special ed, of course, we didn't call them special ed then, got to go on field trips and we never did. And now in retrospect, it's like, yeah, why was that? Well, there was a policy that they made available to those students, and actually there was funding, direct funding for GATE programs at one time, and that's how it was being used. What are the policies that you have in place that support, and I encourage you to look, may hinder all students participating? The practices piece is what you then, once you've made the policy and the decision, that's what your staff then implements. But then it comes back to you in terms of resource flows. What resources are you making available? And then you have these other part, and the hardest part is the bottom of that triangle, what we call transformative change. And you see mental models. What is it? How is our head framed? What is it that I bring to this situation? I'm not going to go over this page, but this is essentially the definitions of policy practices, resource flows, etc. And so as you look at that, and I encourage you to read this article, and maybe as a board at some point, you can come back and chat about it and what you learn from it, because what this article really addresses is how do we make system change so that all of our students, all of our community feel included? And hopefully that's where you want to get to. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I encourage you to read the article. I encourage you to have some discussion about where are we really? And the whole notion of doing some self-reflection. Wait, on that screen, I got very red. I'm one of the associates with Nicole Anderson and Associates, and you may recognize Nicole because she has done some work here in the district before. But with that, if there are any questions, I'll try to answer them. Anybody want to challenge anything I say? I'm open to that. But I really, first off, I commend you for even having this sort of workshop in a public setting like this. This is a difficult topic. And if you take it, choose to take it on for long term, what I encourage is get ready, and you know you're going to have disagreements. It's hard, but it's needed if all of our students are going to achieve. Excuse me. Any questions or comments?
I do have a question. So we're about to discuss a superintendent search process, and one of the reasons of having this anti-bias training was really to have the right frame of mind or the lens as we embark on finding a superintendent. So what are your thoughts in terms of trying to prevent bias in the hiring process?
So the first thing I might suggest to you is, as Eric starts to recruit people and folks for you, is one of the pieces is ask him to, when he gets ready to share information, before he gives you their resume and stuff, block out the last name. Because so often we start to form an opinion based on somebody's name. There's even been research about that. Orchestras who have been hiring new people, if I was here and did my instrument in front of you like this and that, more white Anglos got hired in this setting. The research went, they put up a screen. The candidate came in, sat behind the screen, played their instrument, answered their questions, and the panel never saw them. More diversity ended up in the orchestras because we didn't see that. One of the pieces in HR that the research shows is so often, and I'm not saying your HR department does this, I'm not trying to accuse anybody, but so often what happens with those that we're going to talk to, those that were maybe, and those we're not going to talk to. And when you look at some of those piles, those that we're going to talk to represented one group predominantly. And so it's things like that to become aware of. And in that case, as an HR person, let's look at who made it to this pile. What do we know? Why did they make it over these others? Is there something around the name that stands out? And then part of it also is, and I know Eric's very good at this, is where are you recruiting from? I also do superintendent searches as well. And I know that we reach out to multiple associations, particularly associations that have their predominant membership are people of color. And what's interesting is you look at college sororities and fraternities, as they continue beyond the college, they still have the association, and you can get a lot of different candidates from there, in addition to many of the traditional places you would go to. Yes.
So I have a question, particularly around how do you assess what your biases are?
And that takes some work. That's you're absolutely right. And again, as we work with you, we bring you through some processes and you start to identify those. We do something similar one-on-one that we started off tonight with when you just looked at me and made some assessment. We turn that around and have you look at yourself. But there are some activities we bring you to look at that.
I think that would be nice for like personal check. I don't think we could have that kind of personal check in a public meeting that's recorded, but I think for our own selves, right? As we go into the hiring season, as we go into goals and things of that sort, really what for your own reflection, what are your biases? Because if you don't know that,
That's,
then those areas become shadow areas.
that's
And
you're
then,
spot on.
then that leads. I learned for myself. Once I learned, I think someone pointed out one of my biases. I like really energetic people that I hire. And then someone said, it's nice to have someone quiet too. Right. And so I was like, oh, I do hire the energetic person all the time. So biases are not just race and
That's correct.
gender. It is also what we look for, what tickles our fancy, or what is familiar to us. And so that happens as well. I think, so if you could provide like a checklist or assessment or whatever, so we can understand ourselves. I think the other thing that I have questions about is, you said sometimes bias is out there. How do you manage your biases when they're actually really valid? Like it's showing up, the way that you think is the way that you act.
Mhm.
And then that offends people or not offend them or whatever.
Mhm.
But there's impact there.
And I think I said earlier on, it's really how the message is received is also often where the impact comes from. And in both your cases, you're absolutely right. We would not have you in a public meeting, take one of these surveys and now reveal your biases. We really do that. We make that a personal reflection. There is a part in our workshop where we talk about that. And then what generally happens is we get a few people who will say, I just discovered this about myself. And it comes out of them with themselves. I would not put any one of you on the spot and say, so Mrs. Du Bois, tell us your biases. I wouldn't do that, because it's a personal thing. But the important part is, have you identified it? Have you recognized it? And how do you see that impacting how you interact in wherever you are? And so we do bring you through a piece like that. And you're right. And it's interesting. I work with my students on this all the time. We tend to hire people that are like us in many ways. And what I encourage people to do is know your strengths, know where you're not so strong. And that's who I want to hire. I need somebody to shore this piece up for me, and be willing to do that as you go through the process. Any other questions?
I actually think that would be interesting if we did our own bias and had our own coach who would have one session with us and go over what our biases are,
Yeah.
because I do think it takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yes.
And that could be helpful for our team.
Yeah, I mean, Shanice, we can do it like in retreats, right? Because it's not recorded. People can watch us, but they have to come in. That's an opportunity. Like our last retreat was really good. We just had a retreat where we did some training on communication.
Okay.
Shani set the tone of the day,
Mhm.
right? And there were some reflective parts to that. People could have watched, but
Yeah.
they didn't. And so that's where you can do more of the reflective.
Yeah,
I
I think that, but I also think there's a piece about bias that's really private,
Mhm.
because you don't know what those are, and it could be sensitive,
Mhm.
right? And you might be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. But even though everyone's in the room, you still may not feel comfortable outing yourself like that until you feel comfortable with talking about what it is. It's sometimes it could be very dear. And I know I've had that in the past where people like this, the way that I hire was a personal I can say it now because I feel comfortable, but when it happened, I'm like, what you mean? I ain't doing that. And so that's not something I would have did in a big group. Because now I'm going to feel defensive.
And I will tell you that when we work with folks ourselves in terms of boards and political folks, we do manage that a little differently than when we're just doing a general workshop or, a district, a staff or what have you. We do.
Good,
manage
just a
it.
time check. We're at 5 o'clock. I don't know if it's possible, if board members have questions, if they could email you.
Certainly.
And maybe
um,
you could share your contact, or Crystal can share your contact information, and people
Sure.
with
I think it
questions
might
can
be on
follow
the
up.
page of the handout actually is my phone number and my email address. On the very front page.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good deal.
So,
Again, you've got some reading, you got homework too. So good luck to all of you and
Thanks
good
so
luck in
much.
your search. I know that's quite a task unto itself.
indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, we are going to take a brief recess. It's currently 5:01. We'll be back in open session at 5:10. Okay, we have returned from our recess. Just a note for those of you who are attending remotely. Eric Andrew from Leadership Associates was here at the start of the closed session. He participated in the closed session. He was in the open session audience and was required to leave, not by the district. He had something come up and he's not here at the present. So what we're going to do is he had some questions that he was going to ask the board, and the questions are very short, as you'll see. The discussion, I think, will be robust. He'll be provided with a recording of this, so he will hear it. So we'll treat this as though he's here, or know that he's going to be receiving this in a recorded form. And for those of you who are attending remotely, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the questions and the board comment, and then we will hear any public comment after that. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Any board member has questions? We don't, because it's a special meeting. Carrie asked if we were going to do public comment for items not on the agenda, and we do that at our regular meetings, and at special meetings, we hear comments about agenda items. For items not on the agenda, the public can comment on agenda items, and we're going to take their comment after we've each had a chance to speak, and then we can be informed by the public and perhaps make additional comments if
Okay,
we're so
thank
moved.
you.
That this is discussion item 7.2, discussion of the characteristics, skills, and qualities desired in new superintendent. Just so no one's surprised later, I'll just read all of the questions and then we'll start with the first one. We desire a superintendent who? That's the first question. We desire a superintendent who? And then you fill in the blank. So each board member can fill in the blank how they see fit. The second question is, what are the district's strengths? And the third question is, what are the district's challenges? So we'll have a board discussion, or we can go through each share on those three topics. And then after the board is concluded, we'll hear any public comment on those three topics. Does that work for everybody? Yes. That good, Shanice?
So we're gonna.
Okay, so we're going to start with the first one, which is we desire a superintendent who, or who is, and then we can fill in from there. Carrie, would you like to go? Okay.
And the idea is just one thing each and then go around.
No, you're free to,
I'll
you're free
start
to make it your own, however you want to respond to that.
And my most important thing, a superintendent who brings communities together and also brings people together in an individual way as well.
Maybe we should just do round robin, so we kind of each say it. Do you want to go next, Amy?
Oh, sure. We desire a superintendent who has familiarity with high school districts.
So I'd say we desire a superintendent who has familiarity with our diverse community and also someone who's going to be good at running the day-to-day of our organization.
I'm going to take a page out of one of our principals when he described his teachers and what would make a good teacher. And he said that, and I'm putting in superintendent terms, a superintendent who knows how to collaborate. So you might be a great superintendent, but maybe your population is homogeneous. And that you might be a really great superintendent, but might not be a good superintendent here. So a superintendent who can collaborate, a superintendent who can collaborate with diverse and very wide variety of populations that we have here, student populations and their families.
Sophic, you said two of the ones that I will just second the two things Sophic said. Strong, someone who's a strong administrator and has familiarity with our diverse community. And I'll add a little bit that at least some of the elementary school districts don't have an ed services department, and that the superintendent's expected to play that role, and some they're expected to play many roles, including principal of a school, depending on the size of the school district. But in a school district of our size, we have an ed services department. And the administrative functions and effective running of what's effectively a $250 million organization, along with the diverse community. So I'll second both of the items Sophic said.
Somebody who is not authoritarian. I really care about somebody who cares about people and takes care of her staff or his staff. Not authoritarian, but more authoritative, but caring.
And then I think it's important for the superintendent to be self-aware, and also be authentic and transparent. So I think that's very important to know their strengths and weaknesses, right? And pull people together that help to support the superintendent where they may not be as strong. Because part of it is, right, being a good leader, you're not going to be an expert in everything, but you need to find the right people who will round out the team, right?
So I'd also say that we desire a superintendent who will be good at bringing the board along with any organizational change that they want to make, and so that everyone feels like they're aware and that they're participating, and not just the board, but the entire community. Because at least for me, it can sometimes have felt in the past that the way the district would go about doing things wasn't as transparent or open, and that it was almost designed to try to keep out community input. So I'd like a superintendent who, when making organizational change, will bring the community with them.
For me, what I'm looking for is it's connected, but a superintendent that can manage change on many levels, the emotional change, the systematic change, without compromising the courage to change, and the innovation around change.
So I'll add that thanks to our voters, we recently passed a large bond authorization. It'll be improving all of our school sites, and knowledge and skills around facilities projects would be a big plus.
Maybe too obvious to say, but the real important thing is to be able to work with a board. And that's being able to work with each and every individual board member, not somebody who's divisive. And part of that is, you know, sometimes conflict comes up with the board, and to be able to work through that.
I would also say that it's important for the superintendent to be kind of a learner and open, right? Because there's a lot of different groups of people, different challenges, and I think being able to be a good listener and being open, and then learning from others, and not come in with a, you know, I know everything type of approach, is going to be really important.
So I'd also say that we desire a superintendent who's be willing to push boundaries as to what's possible for our students and what opportunities we can offer our students. And I think that includes all of our students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sophic, for saying that. I agree with that. We do need someone who can push boundaries, and also someone who could be a champion for the gray area of diversity being strength, but also be able to stand in the middle, even if there's public scrutiny, or maybe even stand against the board and say, how do we really do this? To ensure that all pockets of individuals in our district are being served and served to its maximum in innovation.
I kind of want to second what Amy last said, maybe with just a slight augmentation of the word curious, like a continual learner and curious. I thought that was because it's ever evolving set of challenges that we have in continual learner.
This is probably my most important thing for me personally. It's somebody who believes that we learn from teachers, and I sometimes give this example. Tom Moore was the superintendent of San Mateo Union, and he told me that when he was superintendent of that school district, he would sometimes go into the classroom and take over, and he would do that to be reminded about how hard it is to teach. So that's actually my most important thing.
And then I did want to bring up too, that I think it's important for the superintendent to hold people accountable. As a board, we'll be aligning with the superintendent on goals and setting measurements for success. But it's very important then that the superintendent is able to hold people accountable and share what those measures of success are effectively, and even communicate that to the broader community. Because there's always a lot of questions, whether it's facilities or otherwise, right? How are we spending the money? So there's got to be messages around that, and what are our measures? Are we closing the achievement gap? Well, then what are we measuring, and how are we sharing that information out? So I think it's important that the person have some data sense to them, right? That they're data driven, but then able to communicate that effectively as well.
I'd kind of go off of what Carrie said, and I think it's important that our superintendent be more of a presence at school sites so that especially teachers can feel connected to whatever their mission is and whatever drives them.
I think one of the things, and I'm going to take this from one of the principals when he was talking to two different groups of families. One was English speaking, one was Spanish speaking. And he said so articulately, and I think I said that right, about what he looks for in his teachers. And one of those is really being able, what I saw in him that I'd like to see in our leaders, and I've just shared this with him, is that when we are talking about our different communities, that this person is able to see the value and strength in their languages and not set up a we they. And I don't know how to exactly say that, but that we are one community with different slices of the pie, but we're all part of the same pie. And someone who can communicate that in a way that doesn't devalue or lifts up one community over the other, and that will shift the culture of our district on how we see each other for academic success.
I have no further additions to this list, but you got, everyone should say whatever it is you'd like to say, and then when everybody is done, then we'll move to the next question.
So that come through.
Humility is also important.
I have one more. I think it's important to have someone who can walk in and out of different communities, to really be able, and I saw this in a principal where they're able to walk in different communities and really meet them where they're at without compromising other parts of the community that may not be in the same room. And really deal with that. They really actually really believe deeply in that community, the whole community, and they communicate that and exude those values of collaboration, equity. And it's not pontificating, it's actually their values. So I think that that is very powerful because I think people know when it's fake or they know that when it's underdeveloped. And so we want someone who has very good developed skills in that area.
Yeah, I was just gonna finish with one more, that's kind of similar to what Shanice was mentioning, but it's really someone with that cultural sensitivity. And even if they're not, if again, it goes back to learning, but if they're not an expert, an interest in that area of wanting to understand different communities, like the anti-bias training we just went through, an interest in understanding their own biases. And then as they navigate throughout the district, they're able to adjust appropriately, right? And build connections with people who are different from themselves.
I was just to wrap it up. I was going to say that, a couple of things. I'd want a superintendent who's really willing to, say that our public high schools should be the first choice for every single kid in our community. And I'd like a superintendent, who really has high expectations for all our kids and believes in options for all our students.
Ronnie, do you have any other?
Oh, I was just right around.
No, that's okay. Just checking if anybody else has any others or we'll move on. Okay. So the second question is to discuss or describe what you see as the district strength. Technically, it just says district strengths : but I'm interpreting a little bit there.
Rich, you had your head turned. I can't hear you on this side.
So the words literally just say district strengths : I'm interpreting that to mean that we will.
For each of that, for each.
So there's
Area.
two words here, district strengths. And I think, and I'm interpreting that he wants each person to describe what we see as being the strengths of our school district.
In that area.
Any strength that you see of the Sequoia High School District, like what do you, so there's two questions. The next two questions are district strengths and district challenges. So first, we're going to talk about what we're going to describe for Eric when he listens to the recording of this, what we see as the strengths of this school district. And then after that, we will talk about what we see as the challenges of this school district.
I
that
guess
clear?
what I'm saying is the strength related to, say, for instance, strong administrator is.
No,
what
I think this is
is.
about the school district itself.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Because I was looking at the form differently. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. I'm sorry. I was.
That's
thinking
okay.
it was each
You
side.
good? Any other questions about the question? Go ahead, Carrie.
Understood until that exchange. So I was going to answer the people. That's our biggest strength. Staff members, right? Our students, our community, our parents, the people. It's completely inspiring to be here. That's our biggest strength.
Are we starting now? Okay, all right.
One of the strengths I see is our early adoption of ethnic studies, because I think we're on the leading edge of that because it is a statewide high school requirement is on deck, but we've already embarked on it and a lot of districts have not. So I think that's a strength of ours and we should really be proud of that and continue to support it and grow it.
I think one thing that actually struck me when I first moved to this community 8 years ago, and one of our real big strengths is how much our local community values our public schools and is really willing to invest in them and make them the best that they possibly can be.
Oh, Sophic, you took mine. Now I have to come up with something else. Rich, I'll go to you.
Carrie and Sokka both sort of took mine, the strength of the community and the financial support. And to what Sophic said earlier about serving the whole community, I think that's why we have support is because people have felt served in the past and support the district.
Carrie, I want to say mine before yours, just in case you take mine. Sorry, Carrie. I say that with love. I want to say mine. I think one of the things going around to the schools the last month is that we actually have, Bonnie, you tell me if I'm wrong. We have quite a bit of graduates who work with us, former graduates of our school in all different levels of our district. And so that tells me something if somebody wants to come back and work here after graduating, that it was a good experience. And so I think that's a strength of ours. And I'm not for sure we acknowledge that all the time, but that's huge.
I think our strength is our instruction from our instructional leadership. Looking at someone, and our teachers. I'm really, really proud of our instructional program.
Yeah, and I think we also, I mean, you mentioned people already, but I did want to mention that our parents are a very engaged group. So whether it's the foundations or the PTAs, they're really involved and engaged, and that's something to be proud of.
I think another strength of ours, even though, this, like everything else, could continue to be improved, is how strong of extracurricular opportunities we have for students, from our athletics to, other things that students are able to participate in our school and build a sense of community.
I think that when I think about some of our students and student trustees, even the current ones, just how sharp some of our kids are, and that they can be the adults in the room because they're just that bright and cultivated and taught. So I think that's one of our strengths.
The ones I'd want to cover have been stated. So if other people want to add more, please.
The other strength is we value social emotional support. I'm so proud of our counseling programs. We have counselors at every school. The board, the district values mental health support.
I think the other thing is, and not because they're in the room, but I think we have a stronger, diverse district cabinet level in numbers as well as people.
Well, I'd also add that a strength of ours is that community support for facilities. So the past bond measures, I think we've had some really nice performing arts centers to be proud of. So, I think we're always trying to make sure our facilities are supportive of the students and teachers in fostering that learning environment. So we have good facilities, and they'll be better, right?
Yeah, I think we've already covered everything I was going to say.
I can kind of keep going. I won't
Very
go
good.
forever. I'm so proud of our, we have the arts and strong sports programs. Denise and I just went to see the play at Carmont. It's so amazing. So I think we really do offer a banquet of opportunity to kids. We just have to get it to the point where all kids can be part of the whole banquet. But there's work to do there.
Yeah, and I think for what I'm seeing is that we have a commitment to equity. We have a resolution. We have, two folks who are co-partnering. It may not always be easy, but we're starting to see some actions live out at the sites and in the district, which ties back to what I hope to see in the next superintendent.
I'll just do my last. Oh, were you going to say one? Were you going to say it?
It's sort of been touched on it through other ways, but the financial strength of the district, especially relative to other, maybe throughout the country or state, we have a budget that is probably the envy of many.
And this will be my last one. And we are truly now trauma informed. It's all throughout our district. I hear it all the time. So very proud of that work as well.
From Inform.
Okay, so it's the same question, but instead of strength replace it with the word challenges. So district challenges.
You want to start with me? Okay. I think one of our greatest challenge right now is that there are three things that the community wants: accountability, transparency, and trust and healing. And so those are really big areas. So quick to lose it, but it's hard to build back. So not someone. Those are our challenges. There. Sorry, I didn't know how to say it.
Well, I think the fundamental challenge that I really seen that we've faced is I think we have a student population that's super diverse, both in terms of, their cultural background, how their educational background, what their middle school experience was like. And I think a lot of times we really do struggle to serve all of our students and meet every student's needs and make sure that every student feels adequately challenged and adequately supported. And I think compounded on the fact is because we're not a unified district, by the time we see kids when they come to ninth grade, there's a lot of factors outside of our control that we have no ability to change. So we kind of have to work with them where they're at.
Yeah, along those lines, the challenge I see is how to work with our feeder districts more effectively. Because that's part of it, right? Because if we're not in close coordination with the feeder districts, then all of a sudden we have the students arrive in ninth grade and it's like, oh my gosh, now what? But we shouldn't be in that situation. We should know more about the students as they come in and what curriculum they've been doing, what supports they have needed in the past, right? There should be a continuity to it. So that's one of the challenges, how best to work with our feeder districts and in some sense, almost become a virtual unified school district, even though we're not one school district.
Mhm.
I was kind of, Amy, a lot of that's exactly what we spoke about when we created our data goal, but I totally agree with you, as did all of us in the seats before when we made our data goal. So that virtual district is kind of the concept we thought about. Thank you.
I think one of our big weaknesses is that we don't have the ability to debate. And I actually heard this from a teacher this week, that she feels that if she disagrees with something, she can't voice her opinion. And so really in a healthy system, you want to be able to have debate, appreciate debate. And so that's something that we need to figure out how to cultivate, because that's certainly what we want to see in our kids, right? We want them to be able to debate and to speak their mind. And so our staff members and the community should be able to do the same.
I like that, Carrie. It's sort of a cultural thing that it's okay to have different opinions. I like talking to people who have different opinions from mine, to be informed by them, and it should be that it's okay to have, everyone should feel like they can share their, and I think what you heard and perhaps is that certain ideas are not okay to be expressed or whatever, and that hopefully be a culture that we can move away from and more towards one where all ideas can at least be shared.
I think one of the greatest challenges, and I felt like this when I first came on board as well, that we are building a district on historical challenges and hurts and pain that has never had, that haven't been named nor apologized for. So what do I mean by that? It's like going to a graveyard and not having a tombstone there. And so what do I mean by that? There are some things that some communities, and I'm not talking just about my community, there's other people who've been hurt in different ways by Sequoia, past practices, and I'm not talking about recent stuff. I'm also talking like literally historical things that we are trying to address without naming it. And I think that is one of our greatest challenges. As some groups, some families, some individuals may not feel seen and heard, and felt. And I think that's a huge blind spot for us.
Yeah, I was gonna say something very similar, and I think kind of related to that is how do we manage our diverse school sites? Because I think one of the struggles that we do is that some of our school sites have vastly different needs than ours, and think sometimes it can feel like we're not exactly being as individualistic in that approach as we could be.
I'd say another challenge is, we are committed to equity, but how do we bring everyone along? And I feel like there's a lot more outreach and engagement that needs to be done, because the equity work that we're embarking on will not be sustained or really materialize unless people are brought along, especially parents and community members, because there's pushback on change in general, right? And when people don't understand why you're making changes, then they'll say you're taking something away, when actually maybe we're trying to add something and make sure everyone's served. But it's all about the communication.
I think there's a stress in the system. I know that teachers are exhausted and staff members are exhausted. I know when I brought this up before with the old board, people said it was, well, it's just COVID, but I think it's more than that. I think we put a lot on teachers' plates and we never take anything off. I hear that all the time, but it's also, I think, district staff too. There's a lot of stress. So we need to be able to create, again, a more sort of balanced work life for people.
Denise, you mentioned the graveyard, and I think my understanding is in the past, there's 2 high schools that are no longer here. I think there was a Ravenswood High School and a San Carlos High School in the past, both that aren't here now. People who live in those areas may each have feelings about that. And then there's another group that I think about, and those are all the people that opt out of our system altogether and choose to go to private school. They choose to spend tens of thousands of dollars to go somewhere else. And they're also our community members that are opting out. And so I think a challenge is to try to have people that don't feel like this school is for them feel like this school is for them.
Yeah.
Or all of our schools, I should say, our district.
Yeah. And I've grown. I think remember the first time you said that, and I was like, well, I want to be here too. Right. And I said that with love. I say it all the time. It's not something new because I'm on the mic. But I think, now that I'm a little bit older and a little bit more wise about our district, any family can opt out of our district. There's scholarships, there's ways to do it. And so that is a sadness that people don't feel that this is an option for them. Going back to the strengths, I think the strength is, like, I'm just thinking about how we're thinking about Gateway, and we're trying to figure that out, and hopefully we'll hear about that soon, but really thinking way out the box. And I think the district is ready to think way out the box. I think the challenge is making sure that the people who are most impacted, even if we have to work ourselves hard to make sure that we hear from them, to make sure that it's relevant, and that it's for them, not that we're trying to pitch an idea, but that they are able to inform the idea. Because I do think one of the other greatest challenges is the differentiation and academic success from the schools. And that's not because people aren't doing their job. Yeah, I just think we just need to know more. So thank you for that, Rich.
Kind of something else I noticed is I feel like there's a sense in this district that it is harder to come up with new ideas, and there sometimes can be a culture of saying, oh, we've done this way for 15 years, we'll continue to do it, without asking ourselves, why are we doing it this way?
Oh, is that all? Okay.
I guess that, and if I'm hearing it correctly, that's kind of some resistance to change, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I did want to reiterate the point made about teacher burnout, and I think that is a big challenge. Because there is in general a sub shortage, teacher shortage. So what else can we do to make this district as attractive as it can be to retain and recruit teachers and qualified staff?
My last one, I think we still have the challenge of blending communities, right? People from different neighborhoods, really blending them in a powerful way, right? I know I talk about that a lot. It happens somewhat sometimes, but not in the big way that I hope that it will.
I think one of our challenges is that we see the problems and we name the problem so much. Not that we're boasting about strength. I don't believe in just, wow, we're the greatest. No, I mean, but like really name the examples around our schools. And because there are things that people are doing that they need a pat on the back about and that we innovate from. The challenge is, I think we get a little mixed up between the strategy and the person. And so sometimes strategies, we don't want to get rid of the strategy because we like the person. And I'd like to separate that out a little bit. Doesn't mean we fire people, doesn't mean we do that, but just like separate out strategy and person, because we're a very relational group of people. Some people will say, everybody got to be buddies. But I really do think if we're thinking about students and we're going to make change, we have to think about the strategy, not just the person who's running it, because we can figure out what to do. I'm sure there's lots of work to do around the schools. We can figure out what to do with people. But if the strategy is not working, we have to be okay that the strategy is not working. It doesn't mean we eliminate the person, we eliminate the strategy.
Yeah, I'd say the last thing, this is kind of minor, but I'd say, sometimes it felt to me and some other people that, we might have some like arcane rules. We're not as customer focused on, helping out our students and, bending and being flexible for our students as we could be. And I think that's somewhere we could improve to, willing to be more flexible in order to benefit our students and, being willing to change in ways that might help students.
May I say one more thing? And Edith, I say this with all love. Did you throw your hands up? Throw your hands up. I say this with all love. I do think that being a school, I heard this from a student who's gone off to do great things, but was an English language learner. I hear this from many, many years ago. And I hear things now. Is that we do have some teachers who need to work on their economy of language to really motivate students and really believe deeply in students that they can achieve things, number one. And I think number two, what I hear from community, from myself as a parent, is that our children need to be claimed. And I say that I don't know how to best, don't send me no emails, but like claim, like you are mine. So when, for example, if Bonnie sends her baby over to my house, I'm not going to treat her like she a puppy and somebody just to play with. I'm going to watch out for her like she is mine, which Bonnie, bring her over. Bonnie, bring her over. She won't get dirty. I tell you that much. I'd be like, come on. But we, like in my family, when you are in my house, my mother would say, "Now I can discipline, right?" And they said, yes, but it was never like extensive. What she meant was, you're mine. You're going to be protected. You're going to be fed. I'm not going to call your mama. If we're going to figure out how to make you eat that orange. If you don't want to eat that orange, we're going to figure it out. but you are part of us. And so it's no longer those people over there who transferred that child here. They are ours. And that's what a person said to me. They need to claim us, whatever that is. And it's not just race. I also think it's learning stuff. I think it's families who may not fit or they may struggle. They want to feel like, man, Crystal's teaching me. She cares about me. And I hear it in the wards and, former students. They were able to find someone who claimed them and said, you can learn. You are bright as all get out. You can be on the board. You are wonderful. You can lead a company. You can go to college. And then there are other kids who's so inconsistent that they didn't feel like anyone claimed them. So I would like to see that more consistently, but I think it's a challenge. Thank you, Edith.
So I wanted to wrap up saying that the final challenge is making sure that our student voice is always heard in terms of, flexibility and trying to customize and meet the needs of individual students. Sometimes with a larger district and you have more people, more funds, more programs, sometimes the students get lost in the mix. So it's really, if we're talking about measures of success, we should be going back to the student voice and are the students actually being well served? And that's a challenge because it's a large district.
But also, I think sometimes student ideas is different than their parent ideas.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, we're going to do a pause on the board member comments at the moment. I'm going to read the upcoming events that Eric Andrew would have shared, and then we will hear if there's any public comment, and then we can, if to the extent there is, we can then wrap up after that. So the timeline that Eric was going to share was February 8th special meeting. That's this meeting that we're having today. February 9 to 17, there'll be an online survey. And February 13 and 14, the consultant will be conferring with staff and community designated by the board to receive input. And I don't know if we know exactly what that means in terms of how we're supposed to designate who's supposed to receive input. Do you think you know what that?
I do, and my recommendation would be for us to pull who we seeked out input from the last go around and make sure we draw.
Okay, so if you could circulate that to the board members, and if any board member has any recommended additions, and I think anyone can feel free to email or call Eric Andrew, particularly, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you or get email and respond. So if you don't have his contact information, ask Crystal and yeah.
Yeah, I do recommend, I'm not for sure, just because some of the players have changed for a couple of years now, just to make sure we have at least one community webinar, Zoom, where anyone could call in, not necessarily this population of stakeholder, but people can, it's just a listening session.
Just an overall general.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so at this time, just see, there's a number of attendees here today. If any of you would like to comment on anything for us to consider, now would be the time, please. As there is no one, Edith is interested in making a comment, and if there's anyone in the attendees that would like to make a comment. So Edith, if you'd like to go now, and if anyone wants to comment, please raise your hand.
Thank you. My comment is actually just ask some clarification about the events that you just mentioned. I didn't hear beyond a survey any opportunity for staff input.
So I'll just reread, February 13 to 14, consultant confers with staff and community designated by the board to receive input.
Okay, I believe that there may be some other speakers who address this as well. I think it's highly problematic to have the board designate which staff merit having that conversation. And so I would encourage the board to have an opportunity for, just as I think Trustee Stevenson was saying as I was walking over here, for any and all staff members to be able to give input as opposed to deciding whose voice matters in that discussion.
Yeah,
in
so
that
I would just say
discussion.
my interpretation is it's with staff and community that we designate. So there would be all staff and then whichever community organizations we designate. But I don't think we have any intention of limiting any staff members' opportunity to provide input.
I'm dubious about the ability to get all staff in 1 or 2 days. But I would appreciate, and it's unfortunate that Eric can't be here to clarify that because it would be very important to know since we only have 8 days or 7 days until we go on vacation. Thank you.
And Eric, as you know, had a family emergency. Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna see how many public comment we have and then if we'll take people who have their hands up and at this point, there's just one. Anybody else want to make a public comment? Okay, so if we can hear from the one hand that's up. It is Catherine, Wachter, and Molly.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Walkler, and I teach geometry at Woodside High School, and I coach new teachers in our induction program.
My name is Molly Nixon, and I teach Spanish 1 and 2 at Woodside High School. We are here this afternoon to share our perspective with the board as they take on the important tasks of recruiting and choosing our new superintendent.
Despite unilateral and non-transparent actions last semester, we trust that the board will listen to and incorporate the feedback requested from the community in decisions moving forward.
Of utmost importance for us is that you select a superintendent who is able to begin working where Dr. Williams left off in reducing the achievement gap amongst our subgroups. Upon arrival, Dr. Williams immediately supported the initiatives that our district had already started, and she carefully considered the myriad and variety of factors that contribute to this gap.
We desire a superintendent who will support all staff in their commitment to our shared goal of equitable education for all students in our district.
We desire a superintendent who will recruit, concretely support, and retain BIPOC educators to support equitable education for all students in our district.
We desire a superintendent who will listen to all concerns related to creating equitable education for all students in our district.
We desire a superintendent who will build inclusive teams that will take necessary and timely actions to create equitable education for all students in our district.
Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thanks for those comments. Laura, do we have any other comments?
I have not received any more comment cards or comments online.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes public comment. If any board members want to add anything based on anything you heard during public comment or any other thoughts?
I hope that I don't know how we add this, but I think we talked about diversity, we talked about equity, seeing all populations, but I wonder if we want to make sure it's, it's specific, like there's of really someone who can carry on the goals that we have set and someone who can provide support for the BIPOC educators. I'm not for sure if we want to be that specific, but I thought I'd bring it back up since they said it.
Okay, any other? So then I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second?
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Okay. Good night, everyone.